Pursuant to notice, I call up H.R. 60, the Knife Owners Protection Act of 2025 for purpose of markup, and move that the committee report it favorably to the House. The clerk will report the bill.
H.R. 60.
Without objection, the bill will be considered as read and open for amendment at any point. The chair now recognizes the gentleman from Arizona, Mr. Biggs, for an opening statement.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. The bill currently before us, H.R. 60, the Knife Owners Protection Act of 2025, or COPA, is a common-sense solution to a real-world problem. Knife laws vary widely from state to state. For example, some states place restrictions on the type of knife and length of the blade that may be lawfully possessed. Some states also prohibit the concealment of a knife and at what age an individual may carry a knife. Other states have restrictions on carrying knives on school grounds. 24 states do not place any restrictions on the type of knife, its length and opening mechanisms, or whether the knife is evidently visible or hidden. Traveling across state lines with a knife can easily result in serious criminal penalties, as what is legal in one state may be restricted or illegal in a neighboring state. COPA establishes certainty for knife owners by protecting the right of law-abiding citizens to transport knives between states. COPA allows non-prohibited individuals to transport a knife across state lines in a vehicle or airplane if the knife is not accessible to the passenger compartment, or locked in a compartment box. COPA provides exceptions for an emergency knife to be carried interstate without being locked in a compartment box unless an individual is being subjected to security screening through TSA. Under COPA, if possession of a knife is legal in the states where the trip starts and ends, and the knife is secured in accordance with the requirements outlined in the legislation, knife owners would not be subject to a state's criminal penalties while traveling from one state to another. COPA also establishes a strong right of action to allow individuals to seek damages from jurisdictions that violate COPA. I hope we all remember that the Second Amendment guarantees Americans the right to keep and bear arms to protect themselves, their families, their businesses, and Congress must ensure that those rights are protected. The Second Amendment protects an individual's right to not only purchase and possess firearms, but also knives. Like the Firearm Owners Protection Act that became law almost 50 years ago, the Knife Owners Protection Act will ensure that knife owners may travel from one state to another with a knife so long as it is transported in a safe manner and lawful to possess in the original jurisdiction and the jurisdiction that is the terminus, without fear of undue prosecution. I urge my colleagues to support H.R. 60. And Mr. Chairman, thank you, and I yield back.
The gentleman yields back. The chair recognizes the ranking member for an opening statement.
Mr. Chairman, thank you very much. Framed as protection for lawful knife owners, H.R. 60, the Knife Owners Protection Act, is a confusing and unnecessarily broad bill that ends up threatening public safety and actually tying the hands of law enforcement. While we all support reasonable rights for responsible knife owners, this bill goes far beyond what's reasonable and what's responsible. Currently, a variety of federal, state, and local laws govern the sale, possession, manufacture, and transport of knives. Because these laws vary by jurisdiction, knife owners may indeed find it difficult to follow all of them as they travel across state lines. And while H.R. 60 is meant to address these circumstances, just like the Firearm Owners Protection Act of 1986 did for firearm owners, this bill goes way beyond allowing knife owners to travel safely between the states. H.R. 60 veers far from its model by allowing knife owners to transport knives within the passenger compartment of their vehicle, in a console or locked glove compartment if the vehicle does not have a separate compartment. Under this bill, an interstate traveler could have a knife inside of their car at arm's length or right next to them and easily retrievable with the turn of a key, increasing the risk that the knife might be easily and quickly accessed and used to commit violence. Compare that to the Firearm Owners Protection Act, which strictly prohibits transporting firearms in this manner, providing that neither a firearm nor ammunition should be readily accessible or reachable from the passenger compartment of a moving vehicle. That legislation was passed in a bipartisan manner to allow responsible gun owners to safely and lawfully transport their firearms. And unlike the Firearm Owners Protection Act, this bill preempts not only state law, but federal law too. Here's how it does that. The bill establishes the right to lawfully transport knives between states to, quote, any individual who is not otherwise prohibited by federal law from possessing, transporting, shipping, or receiving a knife or knives. But the preceding clause, the preemption clause, includes this phrase, quote, notwithstanding any provision of any law or any rule or regulation of the United States. That phrase is not included in the Firearm Owners Protection Act. So when you read them together, these clauses create a conflict in application that will be left for law enforcement officers, prosecutors, and ultimately judges to try to sort out and reconcile. Federal laws such as the Federal Switchblade Act and the Ballistic Knife Prohibition Act prohibit the possession and transport of certain types of knives across state lines, from switchblades and butterfly knives to knives with blades propelled by springs. And while this might not be the intent of the bill, as written, those federal laws would arguably not apply to someone caught possessing or transporting knives across state lines by operation of the odd and inscrutable addition of the notwithstanding clause. The bill's conflicting and confusing language would have a negative effect on public safety. And because H.R. 60 creates a private right of action for any person who's deprived of the rights, privileges, or immunities conferred by the bill, this confusion will almost certainly invite costly litigation. The uncertainty in the meaning of the statute, which is completely unnecessary, and the fear of litigation together would undermine public safety, placing both officers and the public at risk. If my colleagues would like to pass legislation to allow knife owners to travel freely with their knives, they should do so through a narrowly tailored common sense measure that keeps public safety in mind. There is one that is moving in the Senate. I oppose this legislation, and I yield back to you, Mr. Chairman.
Gentleman yields back without objection. All of the opening statements will be included in the record. The chair now recognizes the gentleman from Arizona for the purpose of offering an amendment in the nature of a substitute.
I have an amendment at the desk.
Clerk will report the amendment.
Amendment in the nature of a
Without
substitute.
objection, the amendment in the nature of a substitute will be considered as read and shall be considered base text for the purpose of amendment. The chair recognizes the gentleman from Arizona to explain the amendment.
Mr. Chairman, this amendment simply removes the year in the title of the bill and does not substantively change the bill in any way, and I urge support of the amendment and yield back.
Gentleman yields back. Who seeks recognition? Gentlelady from North Carolina is recognized.
Mr. Chairman, I have an amendment at the desk.
Clerk will report the amendment.
Order.
Point of order reserved by the gentleman from Arizona.
Okay. Thank you, Mr. Chairman and Ranking Member Raskin. To be
Wait. We're gonna have the clerk report here, and then we'll get to your statement.
Amendment to the amendment in the
Without
nature.
objection, the amendment will be considered as read. The gentlelady from North Carolina is recognized to explain the amendment.
Oh, okay. Thank you, Mr. Chairman and Ranking Member Raskin. To be clear, I am strongly opposed to this bill for the reasons outlined by the ranking member. But my amendment is an attempt to make this backward legislation a little bit less terrible. It's simple. The amendment makes it clear that anyone convicted of a crime of domestic violence or subject to a court order relating to domestic violence is not covered by the protections in this bill. An FBI report indicated that almost 15% of domestic violence murder victims were killed with a knife, and almost 19% of domestic violence-related aggravated assault victims were assaulted with a knife. Without this amendment, domestic abusers would be free to carry these knives across state lines and continue to stalk, threaten, assault, and even kill their victims. My amendment mirrors existing and well-settled federal law that prohibits anyone who has been convicted of domestic violence or is subject to a court order relating to a domestic violence order from owning or transporting a firearm. There is no equivalent statute prohibiting the possession or transportation of knives for known abusers, and I hope that the committee supports this common sense amendment. If we're going to report this bill out, we cannot give stalkers and abusers free license to keep hurting victims. It's shameful that we are spending our time protecting the rights of people who would use their knives in domestic violence. And it's, at the very least, we should take action to protect survivors of domestic violence who've endured unspeakable trauma and ensure that we're not extending protections to violent individuals. Thank you, and I yield back.
Gentlelady yields back. Gentleman withdraw his point of order.
Withdraw my point of order.
Point of order is withdrawn. Gentleman from Arizona is recognized.
Yeah, Mr. Chairman, I oppose this amendment. It's unnecessary. This bill already prevents prohibited users from the protections otherwise provided in H.R. 60. Yield back.
Gentleman yields back. Who seeks recognition? Question occurs on the amendment offered by the gentlelady from North Carolina. All those in favor say aye.
Aye.
Those opposed, no. No. In the opinion of the chair, the noes have it. The amendment is not adopted.
Mr. Chairman, I ask for the ayes and nays.
The gentlelady requests the yeas and nays. The clerk will call the roll.
Mr. Jordan?
No.
Mr. Jordan votes no. Mr. Isa? Mr. Biggs? Mr. Biggs votes no. Mr. McClintock? Mr. Tiffany? Mr. Massey? Mr. Roy? Mr. Roy votes no. Mr. Fitzgerald? Mr. Klein? Mr. Klein votes no. Mr. Gooden? Mr. Gooden votes no. Mr. Van Drew? Mr. Nels? Mr. Moore? Mr. Moore votes no. Mr. Kiley? Ms. Hageman? Ms. Lee? Mr. Hunt? Mr. Fry? Mr. Grothman? Mr. Knott? Mr. Harris? Mr. Onder? Mr. Onder votes no. Mr. Schmidt? Mr. Gill? Mr. Baumgardner? Mr. Raskin?
Aye.
Mr. Raskin votes aye. Mr. Nadler? Aye. Mr. Nadler votes aye. Ms. Lofgren? Ms. Lofgren votes aye. Mr. Cohen? Mr. Johnson? Mr. Swalwell? Mr. Liu? Ms. Jayapal? Mr. Correa? Ms. Scanlon? Ms. Scanlon votes aye. Mr. Neguse? Ms. McBath? Ms. McBath votes aye. Ms. Ross? Ms. Ross votes aye. Ms. Ballant? Ms. Ballant votes aye. Mr. Garcia? Mr. Garcia votes aye. Ms. Kamlager-Dove? Mr. Moskowitz? Mr. Moskowitz votes aye. Mr. Goldman? Ms. Crockett? Ms. Crockett votes aye. Mr. Isa, you're not recorded. Mr. Isa votes no. Mr. Massey, you're not recorded. Mr. Massey votes no. Mr. Baumgartner votes no.
Clerk will report.
Mr. Chairman, there are 10 ayes and 10 noes.
The amendment is not agreed to. Who seeks recognition? Question occurs on adoption. Gentleman from Florida is recognized.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Sorry, appreciate the opportunity. So I kind of just want to level set the bill for a second. So while the American people are worried right now about losing Social Security and Medicare and Medicaid, they're worried about raising, the rising prices of goods. What is Congress focused on? What are we focused on? Right? We should be focused on kitchen table issues, but actually, we are focused on kitchen table issues. We're focused on cutlery, okay? But, look, this is a commitment. This is a commitment by my colleagues across the aisle. They're very committed to the kitchen. Very old-fashioned of them. Because remember, gas stoves, dishwashers, and now cutlery. And so, I know there's more gas stove hearings, and so this fits right in, I think, with the priority list of what we're doing in our third hearing. I am interested to know how they feel about foreign knives, right? Like German knives and French knives, Ginsu knives. Can't forget the Swiss Army knife, supporting a foreign army. Are we tariffing any of the foreign knives, right? Are we tariffing the German knives or the French knives? Are the tariffs on? Are they off? Right? I don't know. Are there reciprocal knife tariffs? Perhaps, are we going to impeach any of the knives? A lot of impeachment talk. A lot of impeachment talk by people of this committee. I don't know if the knives have done anything we don't like recently, so we might impeach some of the knives. Perhaps maybe me and the sponsor could talk offline how we feel about the European knives, maybe on Signal later. So that way, no one finds out how we really feel about the European knives, right? Maybe we can do that. And so, again, we're here talking about cutlery, third hearing in Congress. For the American people out there who are really worried about what we're doing on the Hill, don't worry, we're worried about your knives. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Gentleman yields back. Question occurs on the adoption of the amendment in the nature of a substitute. This will be followed immediately by a vote on reporting the bill. All those in favor say aye. Aye. Those opposed, no.
No.
In the opinion of the chair, the ayes have it, and the amendment in the nature of a substitute is adopted. The question is on favorably reporting the bill as amended. All those in favor say aye. Aye. Those opposed, no.
No.
The ayes have it, and the bill is ordered to be reported favorably to the House. Members have 2 days to
We would like to request a recorded vote, Mr. Chairman.
record a vote being requested. The clerk will call the roll.
Mr. Jordan?
Yes.
Mr. Jordan votes yes. Mr. Issa? Mr. Biggs? Mr. Biggs votes yes. Mr. McClintock? Mr. Tiffany? Mr. Massey? Mr. Massey votes yes. Mr. Roy? Mr. Roy votes aye. Mr. Fitzgerald? Mr. Fitzgerald votes aye. Mr. Klein? Mr. Gooden? Mr. Van Drew? Mr. Nels? Mr. Moore? Mr. Moore votes yes. Mr. Kiley? Ms. Hageman? Ms. Lee? Mr. Hunt? Mr. Fry? Mr. Grothman? Mr. Grothman votes aye. Mr. Knott? Mr. Harris? Mr. Onder? Mr. Schmidt? Mr. Schmidt votes aye. Mr. Gill? Mr. Baumgardner? Mr. Raskin?
No.
Mr. Raskin votes no. Mr. Nadler? No. Mr. Nadler votes no. Ms. Lofgren? Ms. Lofgren votes no. Mr. Cohen? Mr. Johnson? Mr. Swalwell? Mr. Liu? Ms. Jayapal? Mr. Correa? Ms. Scanlon? Ms. Scanlon votes no. Mr. Neguse? Ms. McBath? Ms. McBath votes no. Ms. Ross? No. Ms. Ross votes no. Ms. Ballant? Ms. Ballant votes no. Mr. Garcia? No. Mr. Garcia votes no. Ms. Kamlager-Dove? Mr. Moskowitz? No. Mr. Moskowitz votes no. Mr. Goldman? Ms. Crockett? Ms. Crockett votes no. Mr. McClintock votes aye. Mr. Harris votes aye. Mr. Onder votes aye. Mr. Kiley votes aye.
Gentleman from Texas.
Mr. Nels votes yes.
Clerk will report.
Mr. Chairman, there are 13 ayes and 10 noes.
The ayes have it, and the bill is ordered to be reported favorably to the House. Members will have 2 days to submit views. Without objection, the bill will be reported as a single amendment in the nature of a substitute